Happy book year, everyone! Welcome to our favorite time of year slash worst time of year, where your friends at the Port Moody Public Library are going to count down their top 5 books of the year. Now, this year we had a lot of ups and we had a lot of downs. Ghost romance, nanobots, so much more. Having to listen to Virginia's weird one.
Cozies. That's
Oh,
the worst for me, cozies. Anyway,
2024 was a struggle for many of us. It had some unexpected pitfalls, legends, and lattes. Emma and I are looking at you. We had some dizzying highs, some truly gutting lows. I'm so sorry, Anton, her. I'm so sorry. I just can't. But we're here to talk about the best of the best. So these are the top 5 books that spoke to us, that made us cry, that made us feel, in some case, made us feel pretty angry, or made us feel really happy and warmed those hearts, or in Virginia's case, weirded you out the most profoundly. So for my book friends here, I'm joined, of course, by my old regulars, Virginia, Emma, and a Sadie in a pear tree. And we are going to kind of start off. I'm curious about how your year in reading went. And so Sadie, how was your year in reading?
Okay. It was okay. I feel like me and Emma talked about this yesterday a little bit and just said like I think we both read quite a few 2024 books this year, and we kind of had a lot of books that we were pretty excited about, and not all of them delivered. And so I feel like that was kind of what my year was like, even if the books weren't published in 2024, just that I would get very excited about books and I would be looking forward to them, and then I'd read them and they would kind of just disappoint a little bit. That being said, I went back to some of my like classic themes and favorite genres and that kind of thing, and that I think really delivered for me. So there's a couple books that are going to be on my list today that kind of went back to like a traditional classic Sadie book, what you would think of a very classic Sadie book would be, and they delivered exactly what I wanted. I will say that this year I branched out with a lot more romance books, a lot more contemporary romance, which I usually blend my romance with a little bit of magic, and so well, in all fairness, the Ashley Pawson stuff did have a bit of magic in it as well, but I kind of went to romance a little bit more, and was found myself gravitating towards that. I don't know if just like in the craziness of my life and the world, I was just looking for something that was a little bit happier, a little bit. Yeah, exactly. You knew what was going to happen. You knew it was going to follow the steps, however unlikely the two were going to get together in the end, and everyone was going to be happy. And so, yeah, I read a few of those, and I found myself kind of gravitating towards that. So I'm going to say that my year in reading was a little unexpected. The things I was expecting to be good weren't, and the things that maybe I wasn't expecting were a little bit better than I had anticipated. And I've learned that sometimes you just got to go back to your roots and read the things you know you like.
Nice. And I love to see you getting into contemporary romance. Again, as we talked about, like it's a genre that really has something for everyone, that expanding and doing such interesting things. Even romantasy, that again, we had a great episode, which everyone loved. Everyone loved. All right. Emma, what about you? How was your year in reading?
Like Sadie said, we had been talking a bit this week about how there were so many books that each of us were like really excited for, or we thought were going to be really good. That I feel like I'd read so many 2024 books this year that I started the first few chapters of and just went absolutely not. Which felt a little bit like a waste of time because I was trying to read a lot so that I had like choices to talk about today. And then when coming up with books for today, I was like, well, that one was fine. I guess it's made the list. But I realized that a lot of the 2020, I know, well, the ones I have today are mostly pretty good. But I realized that a lot of the 2024 books that I tried this year were just like not exactly my cup of tea. I did read a lot of books that I absolutely loved that were not published in 2024, but alas, I can't talk about those on the podcast today. But I was lucky enough that quite a few, when like Sadie had said, when I go back to like a genre it's like a tried and true Emma genre, when I read about like deeply messed up, mentally ill queer people and their like really complicated lives and relationships, especially like complex sister relationships. When I lean into that part of my reading taste, I found some really excellent stuff that I'm going to talk about later today. Um, but I tried like a couple romances that I just absolutely could not get into. I tried a few sapphic romances that just weren't for me. I did read quite a few really nice graphic novels this year. So when I leaned back into the tried and true Emma genres, I found some good stuff. But it was hard to pick out five really, really excellent books from this year because so many of the great books I read were from last year.
Yeah, that's so fair. And it's especially frustrating because I feel like you really start getting into like last year's books and you're like, wow, this was such a great book. Wish I read it last year. Yeah. All right, Virginia. How was your year in books?
It was good. I think it's because I actually I was very lucky. I feel like I'm always happen to find good stuff for myself because I feel like I know kind of like what I like and I'm like Emma, like I will stop, right? Like I will stop. So everything that I actually end up continuing always always good because like unless it's a book for like I'm forced to read on a podcast, right? Like like that I have to finish because I have no choice. But even then, I'll be like, I'll pick like five of them and try to pick one. So yeah, so it's been really good. I feel like it was a very productive year, probably maybe more productive than previously. I felt like I read went back to read more manga, more comics, lots of older books, which is weird for me. I generally tend to like shiny new things, but I have been reading a lot more older books, which is strange and lots of short books this year for some reason. So yeah, it's been a good year. How about you, Corene?
Yeah. Yeah, so this was a very like non-fiction-y year, I would say. A lot of the books that I read and really enjoyed were kind of nonfiction. I really liked I'm not going to name any names because I'm not going to cheat, but a lot of the nonfiction that I really liked was a little bit older, like exactly 1 year too old to talk about it today. As well as there was kind of like a return to form for a couple of authors that I really enjoyed, whose last books I thought were okay. And then this year I thought were a lot stronger. Um, and then there was a lot of hate reading. I did a lot of hate reading this year, which is not something that I usually do, but because of the format of this podcast and the intense procrastination, I ended up reading a lot of stuff that I didn't enjoy and probably wouldn't read on my own. But I did get something out of it, mostly confusion and anger. But I did get those emotions. So like big emotions is what I felt this year, which is not bad as a theme. And so when choosing our best books, is there a particular criteria that you go off of when you're choosing them? So Sadie, is there like one particular quality or aspect?
No, I don't actually think that there is for me. I feel like it's more just an overall feeling that I got from the book. Like if I finished the book and I just I felt engaged by it. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I wanted to read kind of more. Um, then it would kind of end up with more stars and is more likely to end up on this list of mine. I will say that one of my additions got added last night. Because it just got finished and it was not necessarily going to be on the list, but in the end, it did make its way on there. But yeah, I don't know if there's a specific kind of quality. I actually looking at the books, they're quite varied. Um, at least some of them are quite varied, not necessarily. They all kind of fit with the Sadie theme, but they don't all fit with each other. And so I don't know if there's kind of one word or one quality that what I would use.
Hmm. All right. Emma, what about you?
There we go. Yeah, I don't really have like an overall theme that I use to pick my top books. Like I'd said, I read a lot of 2024 books and a lot of them were just like meh. So pretty much any of the books that I did not deem meh ended up on the list because they were good enough to make it. But I have a pretty diverse selection here. I have like a kid's book, I have a manga. So I tried to kind of branch out and cover like multiple different aspects of my reading taste. But overall, I kind of just picked like, yeah, these were the ones that I liked the most. It was pretty straightforward. But it did help that I did read a lot of bad books this year, or books that I just like didn't really care for as much. So it made it pretty easy to decide. And kind of like Sadie, one of my books on my list, I finished this past Monday. I added this week. But it was really good. So I was like, you know what? We'll give it a shout out on the top books episode.
Wow, all of these like late last minute additions. I'm very impressed. All right, Virginia, what's your criteria?
I think and that's why I said like it kind of rolls into the blurbs because I think each of the book I feel like represents something significant for me in my reading year, just like a particular aspect of it. Because it's really hard to narrow down and say like these are my top 5 books. So I have just kind of like decided that okay, well, give each of these books, I'm going to pick one that represents something that is important to me this year. So and that's how kind of how I chose my 5 books. So and you, Miss Corene?
There's a feeling that I get when I'm reading like a particularly good book, like a kind of like tickly, bubbly feeling in my chest that I'm just like, like, oh, this is just like filled with like buoyancy. And so these were books that kind of did that. I mean, some of them are a little sad, some of them are a little more contemplative. Some of them are just nonfiction, but there's just this kind of like sense that I get when I'm just reading something that's like particularly well done that kind of speaks to me and is giving me that kind of like fizzy little emotion.
Are you sure it's not the nanites in your in your chest? Are you sure?
It's either the nanites or the sleep exhaustion. Like it's really hard to say. Well, after I'm sure many a sleepless night deciding this list, we are ready to delve into our top 5. And I don't think they're in any particular order. I mean, maybe yours are. Virginia's obviously are in a very particular order. Emma's nodding. Sadie, yeah, but we're going to choose it now, apparently. So we're going to start with Virginia. What was your fifth? So we're counting 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What was your fifth best book of the year?
All right. So for my 5th book, it was the easiest choice. I knew that I need to reserve a spot on my list for this particular book. Are there books that I read this year that made me feel more things? Sure. Are there books that blew me away more with spectacular writing? Absolutely. But there is no other book that made me laugh as hard as this one, which is a very tough thing to do in 2024 because it's been a year. And it also is there's no other book that exemplified that banana pantsness that I love so much. There is no other book that I have reread more times than this one. And there's also no other books that have forced others to read as much as this one. I literally like ran when somebody said, oh, yes, sure, I'll read it. And I just ran to get the book. Or I just forced them to take the book with them to go home so that they can read it. I am, of course, talking about The Masters of the Nefarious. Mollusks Rampage by Pierre Le Police, translated from French into English by Luke Burns. This book was briefly mentioned previously on our 200th anniversary episode, and I submitted this as like the whose book is it kind of guessing game that day as an example of a Virginia book. And I feel like the publisher, New York Review of Comics, did a really good job in summarizing the book. So I would highly encourage you to go back to that episode so you can hear an excerpt from that official book blurb read by our very own Miss Corene, who was forced to have to say on air words like ghosts frozen in ice cubes. So basically, and I said it like it was an easy way to describe this book, but basically it's 3 detectives who notice that giant mollusks have climbed out of the ocean to attack and devour people. And they can verify that this is not just happening in their town, it's happening sort of all over the world because one of them has gained the superpower of being in Uganda and he saw that the giant mollusks were also there. getting some very unclear intel from those ghosts in the ice cubes that we talked about earlier, because it's kind of hard to decipher what they're saying. They travel back in time to the primordial earth to find some clues, and they saw the tiny little sinister man, as the publisher described them, just leaving, carrying these giant mollusks, presumably to bring them back to our world and our time. So can these three detectives stop their evil plan, whatever that is? But first, you can't do any detective work unless you have the right pairs of pens. So to the pens store we go. This is truly the greatest graphic novel that I've read in my life. There are just so many banana pen stuff in this book. Buffets, like we talk about buffets that serve driving a car, flavored chips, annoying people that like to grate nutmeg in the middle of the airplane. Like, how do you think of this stuff? It's just absolutely amazing. And I think I picked this book because, like I said, I feel like I kind of read more manga and comics this year. And so that was sort of representative of that. It's also got that coffee book quality, I think, in many different ways, because I have just been picking this up. I put it like right near me, and so that I can pick it up, flip to any page, and just like get some laugh